and you may not. It was a ritual that was began in Prague by a Unitarian minister, Reverend Norbert Čapek, who was looking for a way to celebrate the beauty of the religious diversity in his congregation. He began a ritual of bringing spring flowers to the church from each person's garden to marvel at the beauty of the natural world as a reflection of the beauty of humanity. All colors, all backgrounds, all shapes and sizes. I appreciate that Reverend Michelle helped us to complicate it this morning with her exploration of the dandelions, inviting a question about who is in the vase, who is beautiful enough to be invited in. It's an old ritual, one that has been a part of our American Unitarian tradition since 1940. A tradition that has been passed along generation to generation, whose roots are deep, and it is brought forward to a time when we are sitting in a space full of people our theological ancestors could have never imagined. Diversity and celebration means something different in our time context. Back in the 1940s, no one could have imagined we would have so many female ministers in our churches, much less someone who identifies as openly queer. We were much more rare back then. And we are a group sitting here of people that our ancestors could have not imagined, yet whose identity and tradition deeply shapes who we are. Our task this morning is to bring forward this rich tradition to our present day, to speak to our current time. And to do this, I needed some help from Dr. Claudia Rankin in this morning's reading. Claudia Rankin is a poetry professor at Yale. She's won many awards for her poetry, and I think it's obvious why. Her words cut right to the emotional experience of being a Black woman in the midst of a conversation about diversity. I don't want to take too much time interpreting Dr. Rankin and what she's shared with us. Her story speaks for itself. The moment when someone speaks a racist word, devaluing contributions of people of color who are also writers, and wondering why a colleague feels it is okay to speak with you about it. John Henryism, a term new to me, perhaps it was new to you too, to describe the psychological effects of repeatedly bearing witness to racism as a person of color. What must be done after the conversation to care for oneself? In sharing her story, we are able to make this old tradition, a celebration of diversity and the beauty of diversity, a little more complicated. Intentionally creating diversity in a space where there has not been any acknowledged previously often comes from a privileged place. And the process is messy, full of mistakes, hurt feelings, and the reality that for many people who identify as white, we are not able to see the ways our actions, our words, our inactions, and our silences can be deeply hurtful. In our current context, in our society at large, Black lives and experiences do not matter. It is why we need a nationwide movement. It is why we need churches to hang banners. It is why we need to continue building relationships and being intentional about addressing racial injustice. Much of the resistance to this message has come from good-hearted yet hurtful places. To say that all lives matter has often indicated that all does not include Black lives. Just as the person speaking in the car with Dr. Rankin indicates, he is being asked to hire a person of color when there are so many other great writers out there. To highlight another example, this year has brought me an opportunity to read more perspectives from Black women, and I am learning so much. In Morgan Jenkins' book, This Will Be My Undoing, she writes about a time when she goes to visit a writing professor in her family's home. They're having dinner, and the professor's father is present. He is an old Russian man with a very stern face. So I'm sure you can imagine what that would look like. At some point during dinner, he tells her he has read much of what she has written, which surprises her. She's a pretty new writer. And then he asks, "Why do you feel the need to identify as Black and as a woman? You are beautiful. You are a good writer. Why not just human?" Following this, she describes the ways that this communicates to her that her identity as Black and woman means she is not human. She even entitles the chapter of the book, Black, Not Human. Morgan Jenkins' story helped me to see that this response continues to communicate the lack of value for Black lives. It's a continued dehumanizing of Black people. I'm reminded this morning of the need for an intersectional celebration of diversity, a time to acknowledge the diversity present in every room through our outwardly seen identities, and the diversity present in those parts of us unseen but just as important. Those cultural practices, those family traditions, the communities we come from, the places that have shaped us, the people that have shaped us. When we celebrate diversity by saying Black Lives Matter, we are talking about Muslim Black lives, trans Black lives, queer Black lives, disabled Black lives. When we celebrate diversity present everywhere, it has to be about all of the different identities we hold. It is not fully honoring the vision of this day to say that these identities are separate or to oversimplify humanity. In Reverend Chapek's quest to celebrate diversity and to embrace liberal religion, when the Nazi occupation came to his part of the world, as you might imagine, they were not approving of his message. He risked visibly having a public and prophetic ministry, and his religion, our religion, was a target of the Nazi occupation. As we look at the legacy his story brings us today, it is a legacy of risking at great costs. Norbert Chapek became a target of the Nazi occupation and eventually died in Dachau, a concentration camp, for holding beliefs that were out of alignment with the powers that be at the time. As we think about taking a bold stance as a congregation, we must remember the risks those who came before us took for our religious freedom and for freedom of many more people than just us. We are being invited to take a bold risk. We are being invited to take a bold risk in this vote that we are having next Sunday to display a Black Lives Matter banner outside of our congregation. And I certainly understand and have heard the fears that this could make the church a target for violence and for hatred from our community, and those fears certainly are valid, especially in the current context we are living in. The risks of our foreparents have afforded us rights that previous generations did not have. Reverend Chapek's church in Prague openly worshipped in ways that defied the current occupying force, in ways that were said to be unacceptable. Churches were being targeted in those days too. Membership lists were being followed, and people were being openly persecuted, inspiring fear in their neighbors to remain silent and to not openly defy Nazi rule. And if people had taken the focus away from those who were being persecuted during the Nazi Holocaust, the Jewish people, the gays and lesbians, those living outside of the religious and racial norms dictated by a horrible faction, if the focus had been on all lives, rather than the lives of those who were being persecuted, we may not have been able to make the inroads towards change that were made. If people would have remained in that fearful place, if If resistance had not happened from outside forces or from within the system, no one would have survived to tell the story. We may have seen the error of our ways. We may be telling a different story about this tradition altogether. And so, grounded in the roots of our tradition, my hope is that we can get to a place of celebrating diversity by complicating the meaning of the word. It is my hope that we can see the multitudes contained in this room and in the church community we dream about. In the spirit of this holiday, let us recognize the risk of valuing lives that are historically and currently marginalized. And let us celebrate those who have survived to tell us the truth of their experiences at the intersections. These vases, these flowers, this ritual are a reminder. They call us to remember the tradition from which we come. They call us to listen to the voices of the marginalized, to find places to move past our fear and into action, into answering the call of love. And may our hearts be open to the beauty and to the complexity of this day. May we live out the values of celebrating diversity while also holding that such a celebration is complicated. It is both. Let us take this tradition seriously that we may see anew some of what our ancestors could never imagine and what they have built for us to live in and to embrace. Let us fully embrace this tradition together this morning as a community. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. And so we